German Chancellor Angela Merkel gets closer to leaving office after 16 years in power. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Germany is getting ready for life after Angela Merkel, and the world is also reacting to her imminent departure. The long-time Chancellor will be stepping down once a successor is named following last Sunday's election. She's been an influential leader both in Europe and on the global stage during her 16 years in office. We begin with this report from Ryan Thompson in Berlin.
The future of Germany's next government is up in the air. Days after a neck-and-neck finish in Sunday's election, both the SPD and CDU are vying to take charge. The clash has boosted the negotiating power of smaller parties, with the Greens and Liberal Free Democrats becoming so-called kingmakers, and now likely deciding who will be at the top of the next coalition. While the two parties meet to confirm if they can align their platforms, Sunday's winning party is pressing ahead. Closed-door meetings at SPD headquarters are underway, with a focus on how to satisfy the smaller coalition parties when formal talks finally begin.
The Greens and the FDP have been invited to hold exploratory talks with us this week if they want. I think both small parties have come to terms with the fact that the drama they engaged in 4 years ago does not do justice to the tasks at hand. All the more, I hope they will come to terms with one another quickly.
Voters made it clear in Sunday's election that they were keen for change. The SPD, FDP, and Greens all saw a boost in support since the last election, while the incumbent CDU suffered historic losses. The final tally puts the SPD 1.5 percentage points ahead of the incumbent CDU, a clear win by German election rules. Although the CDU candidate, Armin Laschet, continues to cast doubt about whether it's enough to give the mandate to form a new government.
And it seems that Laschet's last-ditch attempts to find a path to the chancellery are not being well received. The party leader is facing increasing discontent by some even within his own party, who say he doesn't respect the will of the voters. One CDU member even told a German radio station, "It's us, the CDU, who doesn't have a mandate to govern." Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Berlin.
Joining me now from Raleigh, North Carolina is Klaus Larres. He is a German and European affairs commentator and professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Also with us from Boulder, Colorado is Federiga Bindi. She is a political science professor at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. Joining us too from Rhode Island is Vladimir Golstein. He is chair of the Department of Slavic Studies at Brown University and a commentator on Russian foreign policy. And with us from Beijing is Victor Gao. He is an international relations expert and is also chair professor at Soochow University. Welcome to all of you. And Klaus Larres, let me start with you. As we just heard in that report, it could be some time before we know when the German government is going to be formed, the new government. The centre-left Social Democrats under Olaf Scholz has claimed victory. Where do you see this going, and do you see Scholz becoming the Chancellor?
Yes, on the whole, I would say so. I mean, it will take weeks and months before a new coalition government has been formed, but the clear winner seems to be Olaf Scholz and the SPD. They gained almost over 5%, and Angela Merkel's party lost by almost 9%. It is clear who the voter preferred. And I would say the election also showed, quite interestingly, that the center has been strengthened and that all the extreme parties, particularly on the extreme left and on the extreme right, could not gain additional votes. So that also was a good outcome of this election campaign. On the whole, you can say that there were three main reasons why Olaf Scholz won the election. First of all, the CDU, which has been in power, as you said, for over 16 years, is tired and is regarded as being tired. They don't have any new innovative ideas regarding climate change and the modernization of society, which the voter has demanded. Secondly, the Chancellor candidate, Armin Laschet, he really wasn't very convincing. He smiled during the flood catastrophe in Germany in the summer. Perhaps that was unfortunate, but it was really put down to his lack of skill, his lack of charisma. And thirdly, I would say Angela Merkel did not really appear very strongly throughout the election campaign. And that seemed to indicate that she herself was not convinced of Laschet as a chancellor candidate, and perhaps also not of her own party. And she really kept out of it. Only during the last 2 weeks she became a little bit more active, but I would say then it was too late. So it was clearly a convincing victory by Olaf Scholz and the SPD. But now we have to see what the smaller parties, the Greens and the FDP, will do, because they are, as your reporter said, they are the kingmakers. If they go into bed with Armin Laschet, then the CDU could still form a new government. If they join the SPD and Olaf Scholz, then the new government will be headed by Olaf Scholz as a new chancellor. My own prediction would be that that will be the case, that the new chancellor may well be Olaf Scholz, but that is, of course, at this stage still speculation.
Klaus, what were the main domestic issues that decided this election?
It was clearly climate change. That explains why the Greens did rather well. They got their strongest result ever. And also the modernization of society and industry. Much has been really pushed aside during the last 16 years. While Angela Merkel did a good job regarding the economy, the German economy is still doing quite nicely, despite some crisis at the moment. But people want to see the modernization of society, like digitalization, for example. And that is urgently necessary. As an example, I can only say during the pandemic, German ministries, German health centers communicated by each other, towards each other, not by email or some other electronic communication, but largely by fax. And that, of course, tells you a lot about the lack of digitalization in Germany right now.
Federiga Bindi, great to see you again. Angela Merkel has been such a key figure for so long and played a key role, as we have seen over the past 16 years, in Europe. How is her departure going to be viewed across Europe?
So well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. It's one of the most interesting I know. But so there are several ways. So first of all, there were those who think they're going to replace her in her leading role in Europe, and these are essentially Macron, who's also going to have the presidency of the European Union, and Draghi, also the Italian Prime Minister. These two people are going to likely step up, or at least would like to step up to be the next leaders of Europe in a Europe without Merkel and without the UK, first of all. For the rest, I think it sends a clear message. As Klaus said before, you know, the ones who lost the most are the extremists, both on the right and on the left. And that sends a clear message, for instance, to Poland and to Hungary. And this is not the first time. So COVID has somehow made people leave extremists because they don't have solutions for what is a very practical problem of our life. So I think overall it sends a signal that that things are changing politically. Last but not least, the EPP in the European Parliament, even if this doesn't affect the numbers in the European Parliament, of course, the EPP role in the Parliament is going to suffer. And for instance, one of the things that's going to happen is the EPP Secretary General, who is hoping to become the next president of the European Parliament, and in German, of course, is very unlikely to get that post at this point in time.
Federica, as you say, if Emmanuel Macron and Draghi in Italy assume the mantle of European leadership right now, do you see any major change in direction or perhaps a change in priorities?
Not really, because they're both centrist, right? Mm-hmm. So from a policy point of view, they're probably nearer to Merkel than they are to Scholz and the SPD. So from that point of view, I think they will advocate for continuity. Of course, it remains to be seen what the next coalition in Germany is going to want to go. And if Klaus is right, which I think he is, that the coalition will be within the SPD, the liberals and the Greens, Germany will shift towards a more progressive alliance, so towards more Spain and Portugal. So it's not completely said that Macron and Draghi will actually get the help from Macron. I don't think it's guaranteed at all.
Vladimir Golstein, great to see you again. Merkel also had a very good working relationship with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, and played a role in tamping down the conflict in Ukraine at one time. But how will Moscow be viewing her departure, and what are the expectations for the new leadership in Germany?
Well, there probably should be long-term and short-term, and a lot of Russian commentators are very much preoccupied with something which we might call short-term, that is Nord Stream, and I think they were happy that eventually Angela Merkel pushed for that, and they sort of get in building it, finishing it. So the Russians are happy, and they look at certain apprehension at who will follow. They know that Social Democrats are supporting this project, but they're a little bit apprehensive about the Greens, who sort of are not very happy about it. But this is in terms of short terms. They also feel in the long terms that relationship will continue to be more or less similar, based on pragmatic interests, and I think they're kind of cautiously optimistic. I would add, however, something kind of very, in my view, is important and relevant, is that what it means, Angela Merkel departure, because she was a major politician of this post-Cold War period. That is, she was raised still under Cold War. She was, born in Eastern Germany, and obviously the whole situation of Russia vis-a-vis the rest of the world, cast a very long shadow at her and everybody else. But definitely this is a new era. United States, which used to control Europe through the NATO and so on, is not the same. Russia is not the same. China is definitely not the same. We are living in a different 21st century world. However, major politicians from United States to Europe still think in 20th century terms. So I think, Russians are, those who take a long view, are hoping that eventually there will be certain kind of redistribution of not just power, but of thinking. That we live in multipolar world, but somehow it still didn't sink. It's still Europeans think that they are like under the wings of NATO, and somehow NATO and the United States dictate things. But we see the reality, like recent events in Afghanistan and whatever. They see that United States is not the same. So it's basically it's not only the question for Russia, but the question for Europe: where they're going to head, what they're going to do.
Victor Gao, Merkel built a very good relationship with China. In fact, she visited Beijing on several occasions. How important was her engagement with China, and how did it improve the relationship between not just Germany and China, but between Europe and China?
Thank you very much for having me. Angela Merkel is well received in China, highly respected, and she has won a lot of admiration from the Chinese people and the Chinese government officials. We believe she has applied a very steady hand to German affairs as well as EU affairs, and she has demonstrated a lot of pragmatism and realism, and she is eager and courageous to defend the independence of Europe or EU, rather than, for example, being dictated by one superpower versus another. And this actually is very beneficial to German interest as well as EU interest as a whole. And she appeared very wise in navigating through very complicated situations, because Germany and EU need to deal with not only global issues like climate change and pandemic, pan-European issues, as well as German issues. And I think she strives for stability and independence and nurturing the economic growth of Germany as well as EU countries as a whole. So in this sense, her absence eventually will be very much missed in China, and we hope whoever becomes her successor will demonstrate similar characteristics, because this is a very, very fast-changing period of time, And Europe need to step up rather than, for example, yielding to pressure for fracture, fragmentation, and drifting away, because I think mankind really need a very steady hand at the helm of Germany, and Germany's size and importance in EU as a whole probably will make it that the next leader of Germany or the next leader of EU need to be a very strong leader from Germany rather than from any other country.
Klaus, what can you tell us about the Greens in Germany and the kind of role they will be playing in the new government?
Yeah, I agree with the previous speaker that Angela Merkel pursued a policy of engagement. And I think that can also be expected of the new chancellor, be it Laschet or be it Scholz. The more unknown dimension is really the smaller parties, the Greens and the FDP. They pursue, at least when we listen to their election campaign platform, they intend to pursue a more hardline policy. Of course, any German party has to engage with the outside world, but the Greens have probably pursue a more hardline foreign policy towards China, towards Russia, and towards other countries. Regarding China, they would insist more on market access for German industry. They would value human rights even more than Angela Merkel did that and would push that very hard. They would also push a much harder line towards geopolitical concerns. And it might well be the case that the Greens may occupy the foreign ministry, so that the future foreign minister of Germany might be a member of the Green Party. And that would, of course, mean that the whole German foreign policy would perhaps be more hardline than what we saw under Angela Merkel. However, there are many factors in German politics which, will push back against a more hardline position, not least trade relations. And Germany is very, very embedded in international trade relations. It's an export nation par excellence. 47% of all German GDP is dependent on export, and that will continue to be very important, whether or not the Greens will occupy the foreign ministry.
Federiga, Europe is going through some serious issues right now. Let's take Brexit, for instance. The new Chancellor in Germany will have to face the challenges of Brexit. That will continue for some time. But what do you see as the biggest challenge in Europe for the new Chancellor?
I think my Chinese colleague nailed it. Europe really needs to, and both the Chinese and Russian actually, because Europe really needs to decide what they want to do. I mean, do they want to step up or do they want to disappear? During the Trump years, the European Union had the chance to step up because nobody was there to tell them what to do with defense, for instance. And we did PESCO, but not much more than that. Without Britain, which was one of the main opponents of, for instance, a European defense policy, that is gone as well. So again, it creates an opportunity. But and then they waited for Biden, and they thought Biden would go back to business as usual, and clearly that is not going to come back, right? So the main challenge for Germany and for Europe as a whole is to decide what I want to do as grown-ups. Mm-hmm. Do they want to be major partners in international relations? Then they have to step up, which essentially means that the member states need to be more cohesive, need to stop dividing on petty issues and act and get their act together. I just finished the third edition of the EU foreign policy book. And the reality is that every single time the European Union starts to step up, this or that member state try to jeopardize the process. Mm-hmm. And this is going to jeopardize the position of Europe as a whole. So they really need to grow up.
So, Federica, when you say step up, do you mean that Europe should have a more assertive, more independent foreign policy?
Less wishy-washy, mm-hmm. right? They have to decide what they want to do, what is their interest. But as long as the member states, which are little dots on international relations, today we have a number of major actors. We have the US, we have China, we have Russia that is back on the international stage. Europe could be a major actor, right? But they're not. And the reason they are not is because they're divided among themselves, right? One of the biggest issues, as Klaus said, is going to be climate change, right? Is Europe going to be a cohesive force towards that or not? Is Europe going to have a coherent policy towards Africa? Is Europe going to decide together what we want to do towards Afghanistan, and so on and so forth, right? Otherwise, Europe is going to be more and more marginalized, just like we saw with the AUKUS agreement. I mean, there is a reason why the US made an agreement with Australia and the UK, because the Europeans were not getting their act together. So they need to sacrifice their small differences, and which essentially, in technical terms, means that in the foreign policy you need to stop using unanimity in favor of majority, qualified majority, and decide together and act as one. Not that Europe says one thing, European Union says one thing, and the member states do something else, because this is going to jeopardize both of them.
Vladimir Golstein, Angela Merkel took a lot of heat over her decision to push ahead with that gas pipeline, the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which would see gas delivered from Russia to Germany. What does that tell us about the kind of foreign policy that she pursued? And also, I mean, what will that do for Russia?
Well, I think it was a reasonable and pragmatic policy. Basically, she understands that she cannot, neither Europe nor Germany can rely on this kind of thorny, complicated, contradictory relationship between Russia and Ukraine and whatever they're doing there with this pipeline. So she wanted to establish a very sort of, concrete connection. And Europe does need Russian gas. We're just watching it now as the prices go up. They need it. So I think this is basically it should be a foundation for very, nice and pragmatic relationship with Russia. Russia, as we all know, had a lot of things to offer to Europeans. Actually, it's right there. It's not like United States, which is like across the ocean. Russia is right there, just across the Baltics. They put the Nord Stream. They can sell stuff. They can sell everything. They can buy everything. So I think that's what sort of Russians, more or less should put on the table, and that's what I'm sure when Putin talked to Angela Merkel, that's what they talked about. We need a new reality, new pragmatic relationship, and I think that's what sort of they will push for. And it's definitely, it's a Russian interest to produce more, to buy more, to have more money, to be an equal partner of Europeans. And Europeans have to sort of, wake up to this. I agree with the previous speaker about Europeans divided. But the reason they're divided, if you remember, when the United States wants certain, policies, so-called all Europe does agree with it. But then, the U.S. politicians say, but we have new Europe. They agree with it. So somehow kind of this configuration looks very strange, that U.S. and parts of Europe versus the rest of the Europe. While in fact, if you look at the map, Russia is right there. So I think that's what Russians will keep on sort of pushing. And they also have something to back up their claims. That is economic operation.
Klaus Larres, what is your view on that? I mean, will we see the new German leader continue to pursue a more pragmatic foreign policy? It'll be less driven by ideology or the Cold War mentality that existed for a very long time, and look after the interests initially of Germany and then, of course, of Europe.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Angela Merkel pursued a very pragmatic foreign policy, and I think all German governments of the recent past really have pursued or attempted to pursue a pragmatic foreign policy. And actually, there's a very strong tradition in German politics, particularly among the SPD, but also among other parties, to pursue a policy of engagement with Russia. No one wants to have a hostile Russia on its border. No one wants to have bad relations with Russia. But the problem here is not Germany or Europe, it is Russia itself. Think about cyber attacks on Germany, on other European countries. Think about the unsolved Ukraine problem and the annexation of Crimea and many, many other things. That is the problem at the moment. And it is very difficult to engage with a country which pursues these kind of assertive and aggressive policies. If that could be overcome, like, for example, the Ukraine problem, then I'm sure all German politicians and all European politicians would be more than happy to pursue a very close relationship with Russia. No one wants any hostile relations with Russia, but it takes two to tango.
Right.
And Putin and Russia have to give something as well and enter into compromises. And think about the Navalny affair. This is very problematic and that needs to be overcome and resolved.
Right. Victor Gao, Angela Merkel will be leaving office after 16 years, as I have mentioned, and together with President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin, they will be among the longest-serving leaders the world has known. So now with the new leader in Germany, could we see something of a leadership vacuum from Europe for some time? I mean, what would China like to see from Germany?
Well, I think from the Chinese perspective, we prefer to have continuity and stability and refusing to yield to ideological pressures and refusing to become a pawn by another superpower in the European and international context, and also applying a very steady hand to economic development and to trade. Because I think Germany is such an important pillar in the European context, and a steady hand from Berlin will be very, very important. I think EU as a whole need to really strike for a balance between diversity of circumstances involving all the EU members and unity, because EU cannot be divided. EU cannot be kind of let loose and then each smaller part yielding to pressure from one superpower in one part of the world versus another, for example. I think a common goal for EU as a whole in foreign policy, in defense policy, you name it, in economic development policy, in climate change policies, they will make EU stronger. I think China wants to see a stronger EU, a more united EU, rather than a very much divided EU.
Klaus, very quickly, I've only got about 10 seconds. When can we expect the new government to be announced?
Well, certainly not before the end of October, I would say, and perhaps even as late as Christmas. It really depends on the negotiations and how complicated they turn out to be. It certainly will be a few weeks, perhaps a couple of months.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu. Thanks for watching.